many of you know a bit about it, was anything but dry, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Angus is described in many ways. If you can imagine, no Highway 144, you're in your horse and wagon or something, you're going down that road, and where the elevator is now, where the fields are, there were estimated 5,000 to 8,000 people at one point in Angus's history. And it covered both, was in both Greene and Boone County. There may also have been a little touch in Adaza County, but Boone and Greene County were the main locations. It has been described in many ways. E.N. Hasty in A History of Perry said it was the rise and fall of Angus. One of the other articles that was in the Des Moines Register in the 80s, I think, bawdy mining town of Angus sleeps beneath fields. Now, Valerie and I both grew up around there. My dad told some stories about Angus, but I didn't realize there were quite a few more that he didn't tell me. Either he didn't know or he didn't want to tell me or both. What Angus has now to do note for, and you can come see this, is the Historical Society marker and a cement one that talks about Whiskey Row, and we'll get to that in a bit. Also, the Angus Cemetery is marked. And that is not one of the pioneer cemeteries because people have been buried there more recently than you can qualify as a pioneer cemetery. There was a small settlement that later developed into Angus in the 1850s. First it was called Coal Town. The first coal was discovered on Henry Utler's farm in 1866. And it was a while after that before the mining companies came in. One, about 1877, one was connected with James Hill, who you may or may not know was quite influential in the West, owning railroads and anything else he could get a hold of. He was part of what was called the Climax Coal Company. They owned 3 mines, and there were at least 10 other mines at the peak. The record production was 80 carloads per day. Now, one slight disadvantage, and I'll get more into why, it was a soft coal, but the description that some people made at that time was Angus would be the size of Des Moines. There was an inexhaustible supply of coal. Well, both of those turned out not to be true. And as with the development of many other towns in that period of time, the key was that the railroad came through. And it was Minneapolis and St. Louis, and it came through Berkeley and Ogden. At one point, Angus was the terminus of that, and then they shipped the coal from there. The miners came from many European countries, from Wales, from Scotland, not just many from Italy at that point. And the businesses at Angus's peak included dry goods, blacksmiths, livery stables. Of course, this is prior to the automobile, so they didn't have to worry about that. Opera house that supposedly sat 600 people. And you may know an opera house was not where the Metropolitan Opera came, but where there were traveling groups that would come and present different kinds of programs. There were 2 newspapers at one time. One was called the Black Diamond and one was Tenderfoot. Whiskey Row, which is marked there, there was estimated there was 12 to 17. I just read something that said there were 18, so I'm not sure who was counting them. They were not necessarily all on one road. There was also some businesses, and it may have been saloons owned by women, which would have been a bit unusual at that time. It happened to be on the county line. So at one point I thought one county was wet and one was dry, but the issue consideration was, so I stole something in Boone County, and the Boone County sheriff came to get me. If I stepped over into Greene County, that sheriff had no jurisdiction there at that time. So that, I'm sure, that developed some interesting situations. The churches were there as well, along with the businesses. So as a kid, what stories I heard was kind of this raucous mining town. Well, it was very much a town with the kind of businesses and that you would expect to be there. The churches included Methodist Episcopal, Primitive Methodist, Swedish Lutheran, Welsh Congregational. So there was at least one other church that the worship service was in their native language. Reverend Bishop was one of the Methodist pastors. And at that point, the Methodist-related churches were very adamantly opposed to alcohol. Iowa had a prohibition law that you might guess around Angus nobody was paying any attention to. One of the key factors in the decline of Angus came when there was a coal mining strike that started in September of 1884 and ended with some rioting in January of 1885. The dispute was over wages, and there was a certain amount that the owners had been increasing each year. A lot of these miners were single men who were sending their wages home. And so when this wage did not come, and the mine owners claimed they couldn't afford to do it, which may have been true, may have not. The Knights of Labor, a predecessor to the labor unions we know, was active there. The miners walked out, blocked the mine so no one could get in. The mine owners brought in substitute miners, which of course was not well received by the other miners. They tried arbitration, that failed. There was a boarding house of some sort that the substitute miners were at. That was burned. These miners from wherever they were from were not very ceremoniously ran out of town with not too much to take with them. The state militia was brought in a couple days later, which kind of took care of the strike. But back to Whiskey Row for a minute. That was certainly probably the social center for most of these miners. And that was where their entertainment was. I'm suspecting not many of them were the opera house clientele. So this big strike was one factor in Angus's decline, but also the coal that was there was a soft coal. And even though a lot of that was used for homes and things, as cleaner burning coal became available, that became less important. The ownership of the rail lines changed, and they were going a different direction. The miners left, the businesses left. There were houses that were there. Some were moved to Perry. There were some that were moved to Rippey. And at the height of Angus's existence, there were schools. A high school. They had 300 students in the school. There was later there was a wondering schoolhouse, and I have some family history connected with that. My mother graduated from college in 1933, which was not a real good time to be finding jobs or much of anything. And the teachers would go out to find prospective teachers, and there would be maybe 10 or 15 people for each position. Somehow or another, she found out about the one-room schoolhouse in Angus. She taught there and boarded with someone in Rippey who also had other single women teachers. There was a dashing young banker by the name of Clark Bardole that she met at the First National Bank, and also at a church in a group called Epworth League, which was a kind of a young adult youth fellowship kind of group. So as they say, the rest is history. One part of Angus's history that this is the school when there were more students there. And of course, as people moved away, the banks failed, the stores had nobody to sell anything to anymore, so it was not within a number of years where the population may have been up to 8,000. Within probably less than a decade, there were maybe 300 people left still living there. Part of Angus's shadier past that I wasn't aware of until some of you may remember reading the series in the Herald that Bradley Hurley wrote about the Burns gang. They were quite an interesting group, apparently. The early 1900s, they had branches in different places all over the country. They had 2 safe houses in Angus, and people pretty much left them alone, and they left everybody else alone. One of the stories that's in this book with Angus, Iowa, a compilation of information about information, was told by two two boys who were probably, this would have been in the 20s probably, and they had some pictures they wanted to sell that they had gotten from someplace, so they went to one of these safe houses, and they said, well, should we go to the front door or the back door? So they decided to go to the back door, and one of the gang members asked them, they said, what are you doing here? And they said, well, we wanted to sell you some pictures, and they said, get lost. Luella and Orland Brown were long-term Angus residents, and Orland was an electrician who was, well, he was working well into the 60s, because I knew him when I was still a kid. I'll finish with the Birds gang. They robbed banks, drains, stores, whatever they felt like. And Llewellyn says, and it's in this book here, that the Burns gang would push items off the train, and then people would pick them up. According to Coyle Riley, one of the other long-term residents, if there was a certain size suit you wanted, you'd tell them what size you wanted, and they'd try to get them. So it was a little bit of a Robin Hood kind of thing. As time progressed and they probably got better weapons, there were incidences where they were involved in robberies where people were killed. The last gang member that seemed to be around was a person by the name of Silver Jim Edwards, and he was in prison, which I didn't quite figure this out, in Nebraska for a robbery that was around Boone. So I'm not sure how he still got in trouble. But that was an interesting part of Angus's history that I hadn't known about. It's kind of the town that people forgot, but not if you hear some of the other stories about the history. And it of course started like many other towns with a central focus of coal mining. And when that was not needed anymore, the last mine in that area was closed later, and then of course there were other mines like the Greene County coal mine that was near Squirrel Hollow that was closed in 1947. So coal mining was very much a part of what was part of the area, and some of the old timers, well into the 40s and 50s, still claimed that there was this rich coal underneath the ground. When they tried drilling to find things, they hit water. And it would, even if there was some big deposit, it would have been the soft coal. And in cases now where we live, where my parents lived, when they would have to drill a new well, they'd have to go deeper and deeper, and the cold water would have a sulfur smell to it. So there is coal there, but I don't think it's probably worth anybody pursuing. So the memories of Angus live on, and those stories go from parents and grandparents. This book has a lot of information. One of the older Greene County histories has a little bit. There was a section in the history of Perry that wrote about Angus, and I suppose it may have squeezed over into Dallas County just a little bit. But it is one of those towns that now, if you go by and see the sign, if you don't know a little more about it, there's not too much. Doesn't seem like there's too much to see, but it's worth knowing about, and worth stories being passed on to the local generation, the younger generation. And also remember, if somebody says Angus is boring, just tell them it's a bawdy mining town of Angus sleeping beneath the fields. Thank you.
Nancy, I think George has a question.
Yeah, my grandfather mined coal in Angus, and he had mined coal as a young man in England before
Yes.
he came here. And I was just wondering, and the story is that the mine caved in on his tools one night, so he decided to be a farmer instead. And I was just wondering, are there any records of his employment and membership in some like a union? Because I had at home somewhere I have a certificate, framed certificate that he had that showed he was a member of some kind of a mutual aid fraternity type thing, but I couldn't find it today.
I don't know. There might be some information in here. They've got clippings. They've got. I I don't know about the membership in the union, whether that would be, there's some maps of where houses and things were, but I don't recall anything about the union. Oh, I forgot one story we need to tell you. So the miners would go to the taverns to have a good time. And one of the Methodist clergy, or a couple of them, were pursuing the evils of alcohol a little too vigorously. And so one night, mysteriously, the church burned, and no one was ever found guilty of abstaining.
That book, I believe, usually is, Denise has a question, but I was gonna say, is usually at the museum, back in those shelves back there. So we're open on Saturday mornings and Wednesday afternoons, if you're ever interested in stopping in and looking at some of the literature there. I think Jen is gonna talk about it more, but you could look at the Angus book. Denise?
I just wanted to remind everybody that there's a coal mine in the back of this building. Yeah, a replica of a coal mine in.
Okay, our next speaker is gonna be Jed. Both Jed and Nancy are members of the Greene County Historical Society Board, and they are invaluable to us. They both do a lot for the museum. And so Jed Magee is going to talk about the towns of Adaza and Farlin. So we're gonna go to a different direction.
Well, actually, I'm going to first talk about the towns of Cottonwood and Forbes. I'll explain that later. I want to follow up on what Margaret said. This whole leafing through history started when several of us were sitting around here one day, board members, and we got to looking at books and things back there and said, you know, this is really interesting stuff. We should have some programs and tell people about all the resources we have here, like the book that Nancy has. And this is why I got all this stuff up here. And I've got about 10 hours worth of stuff, so settle in. For example, area churches, and includes Farlin, includes Adaza, and churches. I also came across a handwritten list the other day back there. I don't know who did it, there's no name on it, but it's handwritten from 1892, all the churches in the county, up through about 1947, handwritten. Fascinating stuff, because probably 75% of those churches don't exist anymore, well, the country churches. And here's another one, area churches, rural churches of Greene County, another book. I'm going to show you some of the resources. All these things come to that bookcase back there, and that's an amazing place, that bookcase stuff that's in there. In fact, when I was doing these things and other things, and the other day I pulled out a diary, it's about 80 pages, by Anne Schweiger, that sound right? Anyway, it's handwritten. She started in Scotland, went to England, her parents apparently very wealthy, ended up in Missouri, New York, Tennessee, California, and ended up in Greene County. And I got interrupted on my stuff. I ended up reading for an hour. I realized I had to quit and get back to work. But that's what's back there in that bookcase. Images of the past in Greene County. A wonderful book also. Let's see. And this is Rick Morane's book. Rick and somebody, I think some people here helped with it, 2011 or something. Another great resource. Okay, good. Also, we have atlases of Greene County. This one is from 1950. This one is from 1909. I've marked the maps for Adaza and Farlin, so take a look. Here's one from 1900, back there in our bookcase. Also, I marked Adaza, and it lists the statistics. Just pass those around and take a look at them. Here's an atlas from 1950, again, Farlin and Adaza. Also, lots of great advertising businesses here and in all the other towns in the county. So take a look at that too. The great big one is 1917. We have a couple of these. Also in the back are maps of the towns. Again, Farlin and Angus maps. So I'll pass this around too, if you want to take a look at it. Besides all of those things, for example, another notebook of miscellaneous townships. here, which includes Adaza and Farlin. One of the great things I found in looking through all that bookcases is this history of Cherdan and the Cedar Highland area. So it's not just Cherdan, but it's also Adaza, more so than Farlin. And the page I marked on page 63, and also some other pages marked, for example, it lists Cottonwood dash Adaza. Cottonwood was the original name of the place. In about 1890, 1889, they built a couple of houses by Cottonwood Grove up there, northwest of Cherdan. And for 9 years, it was known as Cottonwood. Houses kept being built, never became incorporated. The legend is, and it's been repeated a number of times in all his materials, is that Captain Albert Head from Jefferson came to visit there after the railroad came in. He came in from Lowerville, stuck from Lowerville. Captain Head stepped off the train and said, "Well, ain't it a daisy?" And that's in lots and lots of these materials. And so it became known as Adaza, never incorporated as a former town. First baby born in that town was named Adaza. I have to say that I did all this research, did a lot of work, and then about 10 days ago, a friend of mine gave me this article called Greene County News Online. She's sitting right there. She wrote a great article about Adaza and the Thursday Club, and that was in 2015. So I'm going to make sure that this is part of the library back there. But Denise Van wrote a great article. Didn't you have tea that day with the Thursday Club?
Yes, yeah, I was there for their winter picnic.
And is that club still going?
I believe it is, and they're going to celebrate their 100th anniversary in 2025. So I bet it'll be a huge blow up.
Thursday Club that started in Adaza, Iowa. Still going today. And besides our bookcase back there, we have lots of materials in the back room. Photographs, newspaper articles, and other things. So I pulled some of those out. There aren't very many in some of these, but this one has a copy of the M.E. Church in Adaza. The Depot, Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Pacific Road. 2 depots at one time. Also a picture of a feed store. I was curious, I cheated a little bit. Besides using the materials back here, I drove to Adaza. I'd never been there. I assumed it was bare farm ground, cornfields. And my God, there was an elevator there, still stands. And I took some pictures of it.
You drove to it, so how did you give
It's
us directions?
what's 5 miles from Cherdan, and it's on a paved road, E13. And there's this great big elevator. I took some pictures of it. Amazing, a couple houses there. But they also had a centennial committee that created a monument. See if I can find that. Created a monument, a centennial monument. In 1984, there was a sesquicentennial committee for the state, and one of the things they did was create a calendar. And the calendar has a picture also of the Adaza Depot, and a picture of their centennial monument that's still there. It's there today. And the monument, granite, is about this long. On one side is a map of Adaza, and it lists all the businesses at one time, and the other side is a list of all the people in the area that lived in that area and were responsible. So it's really a nice little spot. Yes.
And the Thursday Club.
And the Thursday Club, for
Put that
instance, there.
monument up, yeah.
Has a bench, has a flag, has flowers. It's really a nice little spot. But you can take a look at that also.
So I have, you maybe said, where is Adaza exactly? Which North and
4 or
over.
5 miles from Churdan.
Which
You
direction?
go north of Churdan on highway to E13, turn west, left, and it's a mile down the road, on a paved road. I always thought there was nothing there, it was just bare farm ground, cornfield. So I was amazed to learn that there actually were some buildings there. Another piece of artifacts that we have here in the museum, one of the things we have is a centennial quilt. When they did the centennial celebration for Adaza in 1984, they created a quilt. It's somewhere, we can't find it, but it's in this building, we hope, and we believe it's in this building. Someone donated it to us. You didn't find it yet, did you, Diane? Too bad. Also, here's a program from that dedication in 1984. Indicates Bible readings, speech, singing of Adaza songs. There's 2 Adaza songs on the back. Well, first one, I can't sing it, but it's to the tune of When You Wore a Tulip. There's a town in Greene County by the name of Adaza, a place by the side of the road. Here Charlie is king and Bessie our queen, and Lavola the eldest of us all. We're having a party, a centennial party. Tonight we'll have a ball. Here ties are truer and stronger, and friendships last longer. And God is a friend of us all. Our stores, they have tumbled, our churches have crumbled, our toot-toot said goodbye. They'll always amaze you, the folks from Adaza, the best little town of them all. And then there's a second song, so I can pass this around also. What else is in here? Here's a photograph in this same envelope of the elevator and the depot. There were 2 elevators. The ribbon came in about 1899, came stubbed from Lowerville, and because of all the grain marketing, it made it convenient for farmers to ship their grain. So that's another photograph. As I said, I cheated a little bit. I drove up there and took photographs. Here's a picture of the sign at the centennial marker. I'm going to pass these around. Here's the 1/2 of the marker about Cottonwood, and it shows a map. This is a map of the town and lists the businesses, and I'll read those off. I'm sorry the picture isn't better. Here's the other side of the monument, lists the families that were in the area. Here's the marker on the road, E13, so you can't miss it. Adaza Pioneer Centennial Market. The main street is called Adaza Street. And here's a picture of the elevator. I was amazed to see that elevator, and you can still read the caption or the name of it. Farmers Co-op Elevator, Adaza, Iowa. And somebody recently just put a barn coat on it. So I'll pass these around, you can all take a look at these. I'll go there. The businesses listed in that monument, there are 15 of them, 15 businesses listed. Elevator, general store, school, post office, M.E. Church, Methodist Church, which got moved at some point from there to Lowerville, I think, Lake City. A depot, another elevator, a bank, a lumberyard, a blacksmith shop, a hotel, a creamery, stockyards, a Christian church, sometimes called the Church of Christ. I've seen it both ways in a lot of materials. A produce station. The spur line came in 1881. At one point, the population is an estimate. I've seen all kinds of things from 100 to 300 to 400 to 500. I don't know if there's a definitive answer to what the population is at one point. Interesting thing I thought, and I knew this, our family doctor when I moved here was Dr. George Kennedy. Everybody knows George Kennedy. And I think Adaza was his hometown. And I found articles, Mrs. J.W. Kennedy goes to her reward. This is from 1939, December 28th, in memory of Mrs. John W. Kennedy. And here's what they said. I assume it said mother. I never could track that down, but that for sure said mother. They ran a store, the Kennedy store. And it was also, I talked to Roger Custer, who grew up in Farlin, between Adaza and Farlin. He used to go there, he used to go there to have lunch, to Adaza to have lunch. And he said it was a store, post office, pool room, petrol. And I think it was probably at one point the Kennedy store. Here's what they wrote about her when she died. They have folded her hands on her flat breast, for her mother has gone to her long, long rest. Those busy hands which were never still, active in doing her master's will. A good wife and mother, a friend to all. In 1918, there was a tornado between Farlin and Adaza, and 2 people were killed. Another thing I found in looking and researching actually the library's newspapers was this. I'll pass it around. I don't know how much interest it is, but it's 1940, and it lists all of the draftees in 1940 from Greene County. And interesting to me, there were 31 men from Adaza on this list, draft, which I thought was pretty interesting. Another one of the books I think I mentioned was the Stillman book. Everybody's pretty familiar with the history of Greene County by E.B. Stillman. Here's the article in here about Adaza. One of the things he says is there never was any idea of building a town, just a stub track to Cottonwood when it started. Businesses started in 1892, but I'll pass this over so you can read that also. Say, Mike, would you do me a favor? There's a box under the cash register, that's in the general store, down on the floor. Appreciate it. But the best thing I found back in this bookcase was this right here. The Centennial Committee, I think, did it in 1981. The history of Cottonwood, Adaza. And that's the group that put the monument as a big granite monument. This is full of stuff from Adaza and memories of people that lived there or grew up there. So I found that was fascinating. Okay. You think we don't have artifacts? I found this out in the fairgrounds, in our building at the fairgrounds. I brought it in here to the Kennedy store at Adaza, Iowa. I assume it came on the railroad. Nuts and bolts or something like that. Hinges and bolts. That's a pretty good artifact. You assume this is like a 1900 or something. So that's something that we have from Adaza. We don't have a lot of physical artifacts from these towns, and that's one of the few. Any questions about Adaza? I'm going to switch over to the farmer. If you have questions about Adaza.
It has an acquisition number.
Pardon me?
It has an acquisition number, which would tell you.
Yeah, acquisition number, and we can find it in our archive. Questions about Adaza?
When did it last qualify as a town that was inhabited?
Of course, it was never incorporated as a town.
Yes.
The last train, let's see, 1961, I think. I also talked to Oscar Orfield, who grew up there, and his sister still lives there. They moved there in 1961. I thought he'd grown up there earlier, but they had like 15 kids. So it was a big family. But he remembers the train was still there in 1961 when he moved there. The school, let's see.
Farlin, isn't it? Warfield?
Oh, Farlin, I'm sorry, not Adaza. The old Farlin.
I'm an old Farlin girl, yes.
Girl, I know that, I'm gonna call on you. But Adaza, again, they had 15 businesses. There's also a clipping, and I can't find it right this moment, there's a clipping about boom and bust, and that's here in our archives also, a newspaper article written about Adaza. Oh, interesting thing about the Canada store, usually the store is also the post office, in that case. They didn't have medical care, they didn't have a hospital, they did have a school, but they weighed the babies at the store on the scale at the store. Weighed the babies. Any other questions about Adaza? Farlin, we also have binder, like in the bookcase on Farlin, just on Farlin, not quite as thick. And there are, of course, quite as many buildings or things where there's no monument like there's at Adaza. There's a few houses, some people still live there, like Oscar, Orfield, just lives there. And you own land there, somewhere there, and have a garden. But did you get to visit your grandparents there? Is that what-
Every summer,
Every summer?
came in on the train.
You came on the train, from where?
We had to get on in Marcus, because we lived in Northwest Iowa.
Okay.
And had a conductor and rode the train far.
Straight to
They
Farlin.
always stopped there to fill, they said it was a water tower that they stopped.
Yeah, interesting. So you were an old timer. Anyway, this book, I'm
Not
gonna
so
pass.
as you.
Not as old, that's right. Anyway, I'll pass this around too. So you can take a look at it.
Jim? Oscar Orfield had said too one time that Farlin was actually bigger than Jefferson.
Yeah, he said that, I don't know if that's true. They had only had like 500 people, I think, at its peak, I think.
Maybe when all the Orfields lived there.
One of the articles, there's a book by Scott McPherson, that's this one, who wrote about, what's the title of it? Destined to Disappear. And that's quite interesting. And again, that's one of our items from our book. All about Farlin, Destined to Disappear. There's also a place 2 miles, a place east of there, southeast of there, 2 miles, called Pigtown. Anything about Pigtown? I couldn't find anything more about it. I just found one reference to it. There's photos in this book. This is the Rick Moraine book. Photos that I've marked. I've marked the paper clips. One is some are Adaza and some are Farlin. This is quite a book. I think in 2011, I believe. Sometimes I don't know, paper clips. I'm gonna pass this around. The only picture I took, again, I cheated and went to Farlin also when I went to Adaza and took photographs. The only picture I got was one outside of town. There are a few houses there and people still live there, of course, and a few streets. So that's this one also. And here's a plat from the 1917 plat book that you all passed around. And when I talked to Oscar Orfield and to Roger Custer, I had them identify businesses and places. So my handwriting with lines all over indicates where some of those places were, in Farlin, according to their memory.
So Jed, can you check out these books, or do you have to work at them here?
Well, Margaret,
I think you can check them out if you need to talk to somebody about it and let us know, and sign something for it, but you can check it out.
check with either.
And I think
Mike or-
Diane would agree with that, would you?
Diane, they keep
Yeah,
a record.
that's fine.
Okay.
I cheated a little bit. I went to Wikipedia, and believe it or not, both Adaza and Farlin are listed in Wikipedia.
Oh.
Print those sheets, and they give us a brief summary of both of those towns, which I thought was interesting. I was surprised to see Adaza in Wikipedia at all. Well, I have a lot more information, but if you have questions, I think it's time for me to wrap up, and answer questions if you have questions.
Jed, tell them about the famous bank robbery in Farlin.
I can't tell you about that. Can you?
I think it was 1922 or 1923. There was a gang that came up there. They said there was a shootout. They had tried to blow up the safe, but it didn't open the door. They tried again, and it finally blew open. Sheriff was called with the only phone line that came in. All the phone lines to the town of Farlin were cut by the bandits, the robbers, but there one was on the outside of Farlin that was still in existence. The sheriff came up, captured 2 of them, but the rest got away for the week, and he finally ended up going to Fort Dodge, is where they were holed up, and they captured them all in Fort Dodge a week later.
It was in 1925.
1925, yes.
Businesses in Farlin, and they're listed in Rick's book, in Green Book. Here are the businesses. The town was named for a grain dealer. Mr. Farlin came there a lot to deal with grain, buy grain from farmers. And it was, started like Cottonwood, without any corporation, so it just was a settlement. He came there by grain, and they built the elevator and the train into it, so they named it after this grain dealer. His name was Farlin. The businesses in Farlin were grocery store, hardware store, hotel, restaurant, post office, schoolhouse, two-story schoolhouse, 2 churches, the Christian and the Baptist, also Methodist church, barber shop, blacksmith shop, shoe store, lumberyard, pool hall, service station, restaurant, elevator, and bank. All in Farlin. Do you remember some of those businesses at all?
Very few. The cafe, grocery store, post office, I remember that, and there was always a pop machine in front
Was
of
it
it.
one building, all in one building? I remember when I first moved here, and I went to Farlin in about 1970 or 72, and I remember still seeing one of the churches was still there, and the lodge. It was Eastern Star, Rebecca. I had some clients that used to go to Eastern Star or Rebecca Club, or Rebecca meeting in Farlin at the lodge. Oscar Orfield told me their house was right next door to the lodge. His dad was a mechanic, repaired cars and so on. The lodge was right next door to their house. And so Roger Custer told me there's a triangle on that flat map right by the street. That was a softball field. And you seem to know a lot about that, so.
I still live there.
Yeah, he still lives
It's
there.
in the suburbs.
East or west, south?
South, a mile south.
Well, tell us about your recollections of.
Same thing, when I was a kid, I remember, the church on the corner, post office. The post office was a combination, post office, grocery store, and they also cooked meals. When I was a kid, that was kind of the only place open that people went, but lots of the local people went there and ate lunch every day. They would cook a home cooked meal, every day for lunch for the farmers. And the elevator was active from when I was a kid. Lots of farmers gathered there, it seemed like. And the Odd Fellows Lodge or whatever it was called, and we used to go there to vote, actually.
And that's what the Rebecca's apparently
Yeah,
meant.
I think so.
And I remember, it was still standing when I drove through there years ago, 30 years ago.
And the Orfield girl that lives there, I was always told she lives in the banker's house. And it was really grandiose. Many, had 3 or 4 fireplaces in it, big, very big house.
It's still there.
She's still, yeah.
The banker's house had they had a child that was handicapped,
Oh.
and they had one of those chairs that you could put her on, and she'd come down, we'd go over to visit, and my grandma would say, well, don't stare at her. Here comes this chair coming down in a big staircase.
I think her name was Try, wasn't it?
TR. But you talk about not having any signs, I can never remember the name of the blacktop that goes, but like you say, the softball field was in a triangular place, so that meant there were 2 entrances into Farlin, and right in front of our farm, it had a sign that somebody took down when they widened that county road, and it said Farlin next to exits. I have a picture of that.
It's not there anymore.
I have a picture.
Well, your grandparents lived not in Farming, but on a farm?
They lived on a farm, but then they moved into Farming also where Rita, or not Rita, but, Carr just lives, I think. Our first neighbors, that's my grandparents.
We lived on a farm that was owned by Eva Try. She was living in that banker's house.
In a big house.
Yeah, we were like a mile north and then 3/4 mile west, and just right by the Milwaukee Road.
Okay, all right, interesting.
How are you doing?
Yeah.
My husband Dwayne,
Ex-president of the,
grew up a mile and a half southwest of Farlin. He went to school in Farlin until he was 8th grade and then to high school there. But somebody in the family told a story about that pool. One lady, and I can't remember her name, maybe it's Welsh, decided that pool halls were not necessarily just for men. And she got dressed up in her overalls one day and went in there and played pool.
Valerie was on the board of this group for a long time. I think I've seen your name many, many times in minutes, so thanks for being here. I want to say one other thing that's not related to Farming or Cottonwood. You see an exhibit here called Vintage Media Center. Those display cases were over on this wall, along with Victrolas and radio. So, Diane and I put that together recently as a temporary exhibit, so check it out. A lot of old neat stuff there. Rolf Blast just gave us a real tape recorder. It came from Norway that he bought in 1960. In fact, Rolf is talking about donating some other stuff to us, so we're talking to him. If you don't know, Rolf has an immense collection of real tapes and cassette tapes of old radio shows and so on. So we're anxious to get some more stuff from him. I have to ask a question, but please check that out. We hope to have those old radio shows on cassette tapes. How many of you would be interested in listening to, at a program, listening to old radio shows? Rolf, what kind of shows do you have?
I think for the purpose of this, there's a recording that a friend of mine, J. David Golden, put together, and I think he won a special award on it. And it's the introductions of all the various radio shows, and they go from one to the other, to the next, to the next, to the next.
Green Hornet, Gunsmoke,
Right?
Inner Sanctum,
They can say,
Sergeant Preston,
and Molly, it just goes on and on. And
The Shadow,
and a lot
The
of
Whistler.
memories.
you have all those?
Andy.
So somebody would be interested in having a program like that sometime?
Well, just let us know. That's what there's been some debate among different people who've been on the program committee at different times about whether people would be interested in a program where you basically listen and maybe saw PowerPoint, some visuals, but you basically listen. Some people think that's a good idea and some people think it isn't. So if you have an opinion on it one way or the other, let Jed know, or let me know.
All right. Any other questions? I'll try to answer. We got experts here. way beyond where I'm going. But,
Be interesting to see the hands of those who are connected to Adaza and Farlin.
yeah, how many of you are connected to the one of these towns?
That'd be good.
Yeah? Two, three? Yeah, that's interesting. Any other questions? Well, again, help yourself, if you're, pull up, we got a rocking chair in the back, pull up a rocking chair, find something back there that's interesting, sit down and start reading. Like I read this lady's diary the other day, and an hour later, I'm still reading it when I should have been working. Fascinating story of her life, lived to be almost 100 years old. Okay, thanks.